we come to our lesson tonight, we pick back up kind of where we were in our class this morning on God as a creator. And when I was about your age, Evan, my Sunday school teacher was an engineer. Worked at the power plant with my dad, and he introduced me to two scientific laws that forever locked in my head certain truths about God. And one was the first law of thermodynamics, and the other was the second law of thermodynamics. And he gave us the mathematics on all the different rules about amino acids and proteins and all these different factors. And as we do some of our lessons on what would be classed as Christian evidences, we'll get into it. But, you know, those first two laws of thermodynamics have stayed with me, and for good reason. The first law of thermodynamics, if we say it just plain and simple, is that there's no new matter being created or destroyed, and there's no new energy being created or destroyed. And some people say, well, you know, when you do this, brother, you know, X, Y, Z happens. When you strike a match and you release the potential energy that is within a match, you didn't create new energy. It was always there, right? That's why it's potential. And you say, what does that have to do with God as a creator? When you read Genesis 1 and 2, and I take you to Genesis 1, and we're going to start at verse 31, and then we're going to come down into Genesis chapter 2, then we're going to go over to Genesis chapter 3. And I want to talk about why what you believe about God as a creator actually matters in how you view this life, this creation, as well as the next creation. And we're going to talk a little bit in very simple terms about closed systems and open systems, all right? And so what I'll say to my brother Bill, I apologize in advance, Brother Bill, that I'm going to oversimplify some things in introducing some ideas and concepts. But Genesis 1:31, it says, "Then God saw that everything he had made, indeed it was very good, so there was evening and morning the sixth day. Thus the heavens and the earth and all the host of them were finished." This is a completion of everything that exists. "And on the seventh day God ended his work which he had done, and he rested on the seventh day from all his work which he had done." Now Hebrews chapter 11 will tell us that by faith we understand that the worlds were formed. Now there's a different way that you can read or translate Hebrews chapter 11, and you can say we understand that it was by faith that the worlds were formed. Now people sometimes argue and go, Brother Brian, God doesn't have faith. God does have faith. Because we have a wrong definition of faith, for lack of a better way to phrase it. Faith is quantitative. Faith is a quality. Faith is a quantity. Faith is an action. Faith is a mindset. Faith is way more than what most people think about. But let me ask you this. When in Genesis chapter 3, and I'm going to skip a little bit, but when in Genesis chapter 3, God gave the word that the seed of woman would bruise the head of the serpent, did God ever doubt that he was going to bring into manifestation, that a woman was going to manifest, that she would conceive a human child without the agency of a human male, and that human male would begin the process of the end of the great enemy of humanity? And you say, well, no, brother. Well, at a minimum, it was at least 4,000 years from when God spoke it until Jesus was born of a virgin. God's word continues because does God doubt his word once he speaks it? You say no. And in that sense, what? What God brings about, and this is something he addresses, that the Lord addresses through the Apostle Paul in Romans chapter 4. It says that God, in relation to Abraham, God calls the things that do not exist as though they already were. God calls what is not even here yet as though it is already past tense when he speaks. This is the level of faith in which God operates. Now, many of us have been told that, and I understand what they mean, and if you know this phrase, cool. If not, I'll still explain it. But if you've ever heard the phrase creatio ex nihilo, now you go, yes, brother, I contemplate creatio ex nihilo rather frequently, and I'm glad that you've used the Latin on it. I'm not using the Latin because I'm smart. I'm using the Latin because that's what generally, that's how you'll see it written. It's almost like spelling the word creation, creatio, ex, nihilo, nihilo. And people say God created everything out of nothing. That's not viable. Now, in the sense that everything that's in this system, that it came from someplace outside this system, yes, in that sense it was out of nothing. But where did it all come from? It came from God's divine will. It doesn't exist out of nothingness. It exists out of God's beingness. And this takes us back into that discussion that we've had, that God says, I am that I am. That God is the very nature and essence of all existence in every form and capacity. So that in chapter 2, verses 1 and 2 of Genesis, that when he says that the heavens, the earth, and all the host of them were finished. You say, well, brother, that's just the moon and the stars and the skies. And no. All of the host. Jesus Christ is known by his designation in the book of James as Jehovah Sabaoth, or Lord Sabaoth. Not Lord of the Sabbath, but Lord of hosts. When Joshua goes up on the hill as they're preparing to take Jericho, the Lord introduces himself as the commander of the hosts of the Lord. So when we talk about that he finished the host, everything visible that we can see in the night sky and everything that we can ascertain with things like Hubble and other telescopes that have gone out, everything that we see is the heavens and the earth. That's the visible. The hosts is, in a strictest sense, pertains primarily to that which would be in the realm of the angelic, what we would normally call the realm of the angelic. And on that day, God ended his work. The universe, in its most basic way of saying it, is a closed system. Now, most people wouldn't really argue too much and say that the solar system is a closed system, meaning nothing new is coming in and nothing is really going out. There's not a lot of input and exchange there going on. But it's a fixed system. Now, I'm sure some of you who have contemplated, Evan, I know you've been contemplating string theory a lot lately, correct, son? Yes? No? Okay. All right. Now, some people would say, well, you know, with quantum mechanics, we've learned da-da-da-da-da-da-da. Everything that is, whether we understand how all the pieces and parts work together, doesn't change that everything there is what there is, and that's that. And so in that sense, it is a fixed quantity. There's nothing new being created. There's nothing new being destroyed in that sense. And I'll tell you where this comes into play on things in the Christian life. God established this principle, right? And brothers and sisters, please do me a favor. Don't ever talk about karma as Christians. Okay, please quit saying karma. That's their karma, brother. We're Christians. We don't do karma. The cross of Jesus Christ eliminated your karma. Okay? It eliminates it. Karma is a Hindu, Buddhist concept that says that for all the good you do, it has to balance out with negative. And for all the negative it does, it has to balance out with positive. And when you get bad back in your life, it's because you put bad out. Or when you get good in your life, it's because you put good out. Yeah, those are not Christian concepts. We believe in this thing called sowing and reaping. Can God multiply loaves and fishes? You say yes. Why? Okay, I've got to vote because he's God. Now, that's a fair answer. That's a valid answer. Because he created it. Here's why. Does God have the ability to take what already exists and multiply and give it increase? And the answer is yes. If you really think about how this earth is made, how come every farm field in the world isn't 50 feet lower than it is right now today? Right? And I see Brother Stevens is like, what and where are you going with this, brother? Well, and I intend to confuse with that question. You plant a seed, right? And we'll use corn, you know. Corn seed's about the size of your little pinky nail. Okay? If you're in Iowa, it'll produce a stalk about that tall with a ridiculous number of ears. It will outgrow what that seed was by about 1,000 to 1,500%. Yet the ground in which you sowed it will not have a corresponding absence of that same amount of dirt and nutrient. And so when you look at these huge fields, you know, how can a person plant 10,000 acres in cotton and all that cotton gets stacked up and him not be missing that same amount of soil and everything else? You say, well, brother, that's... In the natural, we never question how you can plant something and it yields far more than what it ever seems to take from the ground. You say, well, the sun and the process, that's it right there, isn't it? There's a process. There's a process. If you have nothing, and I remember, Ronnie, one of the first times I ever did this. I had like $100 left, and brother, my bills were more than $100 that week. It was not going to work out, man. There was no way. Now, most people would have said, use your $100 and spend it on what bills you can and try and jockey everything else till you get your money for more stuff. I went on ahead and I said, you know what? The $100 is not going to change a single thing for me this week. Maybe I can give the $100 somewhere else and it'll help someone else. That it might actually help them. And what came back to me was more than what I needed for that week by the end of the next day. And you say, how did it come back to you? Well, someone called and they said, hey, we got a job. How much will we charge to do it? And I said, here's how much. And you say, do you really believe it was because you gave that money away and you sowed it out? Absolutely. And here's why. Because I had told God, Lord, you know all things. You know this ain't enough to cover what I need. You need to help me do something. You say, that's how you talk to God? Well, yeah. I got David. I got all kinds of people that they're like aggressive when they pray, right? And I don't, I used to not talk about money very much in the church because it made people mad. And they said, do you really believe that God blah, 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 blah? And I said, yeah, I do. And I said, here's why. I said, what you and I exchange in a dollar bill, hypothetically, what is in back of the dollar bill? Hypothetically, it's gold and silver. I said, do you realize that the gold that we place such a high value on that regulates our general medium of exchange is pavement in heaven? I said, therefore, God is able to transfer from his stores in heaven to places here on earth and make things move and abound to be a blessing to me. If I'll sow, then I'll have something to reap. I can have a harvest. And they said, well, if you have nothing. I said, if you have nothing, I said, you better find something to sow. I said, I don't care if it's a smile. And no, don't any of you go, well, Brother Brian, you better make sure you always have money to sow because smiles will probably not be your thing. Yeah, I know. Because what? Nothing is being brought out. There is nothing that we have that's being brought out of nothing. Everything that is what there is. But God, as the one who knows where everything is, can reallocate things for our blessing and our benefit. And so in this realm, if we understand the principle of sowing, and if we understand that there's processes natural and there's processes spiritual. Because in the natural, whoever goes to the fuel station and pumps fuel shall drive. Whoever goes not shall not drive. Now that's a simple one. Yet to my sojourners, I say this. How many of you have ever had to have the argument, the conversation, the fight, the tooth pulling as you've traveled when you read Mark 16? Whosoever believes and is baptized shall be saved. Whosoever believes not shall be condemned. And they go, well, see, it doesn't say whoever does not believe and isn't baptized. Well, whoever does not go to the fuel station shall not drive. If your car's sitting on E and the last of your fumes you don't use to get to the fuel station to pump fuel, guess what? You're done driving. There's a natural process. There's a spiritual process. There's a natural process by which children come into existence. There is a spiritual process that God uses water and the Spirit and the preaching of the Word to bring about new life in the church. And it's important for us to understand that everything we need is already here. Everything we need. Even Peter will tell us that we have everything we need for life and godliness. Now, some people say, well, bro, that's only spiritual things. But didn't Jesus say to us what? I've come that you might have life and that you might have it more abundantly. The thief doesn't come except for to steal, kill, and destroy. But the thief will not be in heaven. The thief will not be in the new creation where he can access anything. Therefore, to say, well, no, that's all just future tense. No, it's not future tense. It's now tense. Because these things are fixed. So wherein lies the problem? As a kid, Evan, we used to go up to the mountains, 2 or 3 weeks each summer for different things. And I learned a simple lesson as a kid in the mountains. If you kick the wrong size rock at 12,000 feet and it hits the other wrong-sized rocks with the proper momentum, someone's house or RV may cease to exist. You say, Why would you even know that? Because I kicked a couple. And fortunately, the rock bounced, arced, hit, busted about 20 feet from taking out someone's RV one time. I was like 8, okay? So cut me a little bit of slack. I was like 8, you know? We just thought we were playing. But, you know, things like the laws of inertia, and I didn't know about the law of entropy at the time. And I didn't know how the law of entropy and the law of gravity sometimes work together to bring chaos out of order. But do you realize that everything in this creation had a floor, a bottom level, beyond which humanity could not sink until Adam and Eve pulled the trigger on sin? Once they pulled the trigger on sin, they collapsed the system as a whole. Now, why is that important? Because when you come over into Revelation, two forms of entropy moved into motion on the day that Adam and Eve sinned: spiritual entropy and physical. Did God curse the earth against man, or did the earth become cursed because man cursed himself in rebellion against God? You see, life's hard, not because God's not good. Life's hard because great-grandpa Adam pulled the trigger and activated spiritual and physical entropy. So that Revelation chapter 10, and it's an interesting thing as you go through Revelation, remember almost every single reference to God as Almighty in the New Testament is in the book of Revelation, with the exception of one reference in 2 Corinthians 6. Okay? But look at Revelation 10:6. All right? And this is, the trumpets are being blown and everything else. And he says there, it says that, you know, the angel that I saw standing on the sea and on the land raised up his hand to heaven and swore by him who lives forever and ever, who created heaven and the things that are in it, the earth and the things that are in it, and the sea and the things that are in it, that there should be delay no longer. But in the days of the sounding of the seventh angel, when he is about to sound, the mystery of God would be finished, as he declared to his servants the prophets. Now, isn't this an interesting thing? The winding down of what happens in this realm is tied to the very nature and identity of the one who created everything in the first place. And this is a thing of tremendous comfort if you'll embrace it. I know more Christians that fear the devil than fear the Lord. Because in church we've been told what? Brother, God doesn't want us to be afraid of him. He just wants us to love him. Well, how's that been working out for us? But then when you give a lesson on the devil, and Ronnie, Catherine will back me up on this. Every time I've ever given a lesson about the devil and what we need to be mindful of because he is our enemy, I've never not had at least one person come and go, you know, brother, I'm scared of the devil. Why are you scared of the devil? Well, you know, brother, he wants to destroy me. Okay. Did you ever get on a plane? There's terrorists all around the world looking for opportunities to get on planes, American planes, and bring them down. You know? My prayer when I get on a plane is, Lord, if this thing's going to crash, at least let me not go out screaming like a crybaby. Let me maintain my composure so that I die with dignity. You say, yeah, that's my prayer. And especially when we get into a round of turbulence, that, you know, my spine hurts, my neck hurts, my hips hurt, and my headache won't stop now. Yeah, that's my whole prayer. Dear God, if this thing is to go down, please let me maintain my composure. You know? You say, your prayer isn't, Lord, let us get out of the turbulence safety and get home safety? No. No. But you see, the devil doesn't have ultimate power in this realm. He didn't have the power to create it, and he doesn't have the power to finish it. Colossians chapter 1, and we'll hit Colossians, then we'll hit Hebrews, and then we'll come back to Revelation, and the lesson will be yours. And yeah, it'll actually go quicker than you think. Colossians 1:16 says, "For by him all things were created that are in heaven and that are on earth, visible and invisible, whether thrones or dominions or principalities or powers, all things were created through him and for him." Everything visible, what we see, everything invisible, what we don't see. You say, well, great, that's a wonderful definition, what we can see and what we can't see. How many of you see angels? And I'm not, and I don't mean that glib or flippantly. And if you think you've seen an angel, do yourself a favor, do not raise your hand on that, because there will be plenty of people who tell you, no, you never did. Okay? Generally speaking, most people don't see the angelic realm. I sometimes believe that people with schizophrenia can sometimes see beyond the visible, and that's part of what drives them insane. I really do. I think that certain kinds of mental health issues is because their filter isn't quite the same as what everybody else's is, and they see stuff that, if you remember when Elisha's servant was all freaked out because the human army was around him, he's like, don't worry, we're fine. And he's like, no, we're not, we're going to die. And he's, Lord, let his eyes see. And when he saw, what did he see? He saw that the human army was surrounded by the army of the Lord that was far, far bigger. And so ultimately, when the Apostle Paul by the Holy Spirit says that at the name of Jesus, every knee shall bow of things in heaven, on earth, and under the earth, and every tongue confess that Jesus Christ is Lord to the glory of God the Father. Satan has to bow. Satan must bow. You and I will have to bow that day. But the great enemy of humanity also has to bow. He doesn't get out of it. And when you and I think about the nature of our Lord, and I want you to see this in Hebrews. It comes from the Old Testament, but it's quoted in Hebrews chapter 1. Because it's the conversations between the Father and the Son from eternity. And begin at verse 10 of Hebrews 1, it says, "And you, Lord, in the beginning laid the foundation of the earth, and the heavens are the work of your hands. They will perish, but you remain. They all will grow old like a garment. Like a cloak, you will fold them up, and they will all be changed, but you are the same, and your years will not fail." Now I want you to pause for just a second. When I was a kid, Evan, because nuclear war was all the time in the news, right? The Russians have this many tanks in East Germany ready to go to war, and this many nuclear warheads, and we're looking for a possible nuclear winter. That was like every day, man. The news was something about nuclear warheads, the Russians, World War III, we're all going to die, or we're all going to be radiated till we all die, right? So when I say this, I'm not like crazy, but kids think about crazy stuff, right? Do remember when you thought about crazy stuff? You don't now that you're a teenager, right? Right? But they told us that Jupiter could have been a second star. And I had this idea. What if we took all the missiles on Earth and we shot all of them at Jupiter and tried to light it up to just see if we could, what would happen? Yeah, I like that you're laughing. I like that you're laughing, bud. Because in our solar system, the largest planet is Jupiter. It's 1/10 the size of the sun. You know, I can't even stop an ocean wave from coming in. Anytime you want to find out how powerful you're not, let the tidal coefficient be about 70 on a high wind day when there's a storm pushing in out of the Caribbean, and go out and see if you can stay standing for 1 hour this deep in the tide. You say, well, no, you're not going to succeed. But Hebrews tells us that as easy as you and I take off a jacket, fold it up, and put it away, is how easy and how simple it is for the Lord to fold up this entire universe. And Revelation will tell us what? That he brings a brand new one out. That for him to change a universe is as easy as you and I to change a jacket. And who will be included in that? Well, the devil. Because when you go to Revelation, and yeah, I said the lesson would be yours here fairly shortly, and we're about to wrap up. All right, death and hell, Revelation 20 tells us death and hell were cast into the lake of fire, which is the second death. And the beast and the false prophet and the devil and all of them, they're cast into the lake of fire, which is the second death. But look at Revelation 21. It says, now I saw a new heaven and a new earth, for the first heaven, the first earth had passed away. Also there was no more sea. Remember, sea in Daniel and in Revelation is symbolic of humanity in rebellion to God. Then I, John, saw the holy city, New Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven from God, prepared as a bride adorned for her husband. All right. Now, this is a beautiful thought. When you're the one who has the ability to set in order laws, it's because you're superior to the laws. And you say, no. Okay, first of all, how many of you think our Congress people actually abide by the laws they make for the rest of us? They have voted all of us the Affordable Health Care Act, and then they voted themselves that they didn't have to submit it, and then they voted them unlimited funding to not have to have what they told the rest of us we had to have. Okay? And I'm not trying to be political, because that was both sides of the aisle that did that. Because why? The ones who make the laws are superior to the laws. And that's in a natural sense. But if God is the one who designed the law of gravity, God's the one who designed the law of lift, the law of inertia, the laws of thermodynamics, the laws of, and pick any number of scientific laws. He put those things in place for the stability of the system that he set up for us to live in. That's why. Some of the hurricane rules when it comes to construction, to me, are just ridiculous. Some of them. But others, yeah, you probably need to actually strap the roof down to the rest of the frame of the house, not just have the roof basically sitting loose on top of concrete block. That's a pretty good law, you know? But have you ever considered, because now we come back to closed systems and the introduction of chaos, that when the final judgment scene happens and the books are opened and everything is judged, that everything that contributed to sin and chaos and disorder and death that wanted nothing to do with God will be locked away in their own closed system, also known as hell. And when they're all locked away, it's not until then that God brings out the new creation. So that even their eyesight can never gain anything from it. And that's why Revelation talks about none of this, and it gives this long list of all the stuff that cannot enter in there. Because everything that when Adam and Eve flipped the switch and brought in all of the things that make our lives ridiculously, unnecessarily hard here, that never again will there be another creation where those things can ever happen. And that as you and I go back out into this week, Ronnie, because now we bring it back to what's the easy part to take away. I told you this morning, here's what I think will probably happen this week. I have no idea. No idea. I mean, apparently the situation in the Middle East changes every 2.5 hours right now. And as best I can tell, 95% of the news reports are contradictory and none of them can be trusted. The only thing they seem to be certain on is that we're going to pay more for gas and the prices won't come back down. Other than that, I don't really know what else. But you know, this isn't the first time this has happened in human history. Other things have happened in other empires, and people have still survived, people have still thrived, people have still made it, and life's been okay. But the one who holds all things together, and this is what 2 Peter chapter 3 tells us, that God is not slack concerning his promise. There was a flood a long time ago, and he says, of this they're willingly ignorant, that the world that then was, standing in and out of the water, and the world that now is, were both maintained by that same word. And he says that the delay isn't because God's not ready to fold this thing up. The delay is because there are people who still want to come to God's side. And that it's important that you and I keep in mind that the devil that on some days looks like his chaos reigns supreme has an appointment that one day he will bow the knee and then he'll be folded up and locked away forever. So that when the new system comes out, there will never be anything that can ever trip that system to be anything other than the perfection of God's love between us as his children and him and each other. And that as you go through and maybe you read in your Bible this week, pay attention to all those things about God as a creator. And remind yourself that no more than you and I can stop the ocean, as weak as we are before the ocean when it comes time for it to hit us, on that day, the devil himself will be even weaker before the righteous wrath of Christ. And so in the moment, we might sometimes be a little bit disoriented. Reorient yourself. He brought everything into existence by the word of his power and the action of his will. He maintains it for the benefit of those who want to be part of something better. And when he shuts it down, everything that didn't want to be will forever be locked away. And when he brings out the new one, nothing will ever come in again to ever cause chaos or disorder for anyone in that new creation. And if you're here tonight, Bill, I'm looking forward to no more entropy, brother. The new heavens and the new earth, no more entropy. Bill knows what I mean when I say that. There is no more entropy.